Hey guys, this is Tyler here, and I'm going to discuss a quick topic here, and that is MGTOW for prison convicts or ex-prison convicts. This is not very well spoken of, and I think it's very important, and I'm going to show why I think it can be a very utile philosophy for guys who've been to prison or who are going to prison. If we think in like USA, the incarceration rate is incredibly high nowadays, and it just continues to increase with each passing year. I believe that it's in the millions, the number of people that are in prison, incarcerated in the US. And I think in my personal life, I've never lived in a country where I've met so many people who've had a family member or friend who's been to prison. That's super common. I myself have family, relatives that have been to prison, and I had a few friends in the past actually who had also been to prison. Whereas like here in Estonia, I don't even know anyone who's ever been to prison. The same when I was in Russia, and also when I was in Chile, never met a single person who had been to prison. And so it kind of demonstrates there's a lot of guys incarcerated in the US, and it's very easy, especially nowadays, to be sent to prison for almost every other thing that is deemed as illegal. Now, many guys, when they go to prison though, and after they get out of prison, have a very difficult time often coping with day-to-day life. There's many prison shows out there that are for guys, especially who've been to prison, and or they're to help the guys in this position. I mean, we think of like Sean Atwood or After Prison Show. These are two of the bigger ones, and these guys obviously they're designed for everyone, but I think especially for people who've been in the prison life and who've gotten out, and many of these guys of course have problems adjusting to civilian life. Obviously, when you've been locked up for like 20 years or longer, it's going to be very difficult to adjust to a normal life where there's not nearly as many constraints on how you live, on your schedule, and basically being told everything you're going to do throughout the day. That's how prison life is, and it's very terrible. Unfortunately, what's occurred in the U.S., they obviously too have the largest incarceration rate is for people selling illicit substances in America, like controlled substances. And these guys, obviously, many of them aren't really actual criminals in my book. I think they were maybe doing something to make some quick money or any number of reasons they were doing it, but it certainly didn't mean that they were that they belonged in prison for many years. No, it's very common for guys who've been to prison. They will have a wife or girlfriend before they get locked up, and I believe it's something like 90% of guys who are locked up go through divorce while in prison. It's very high. It's very unlikely that a woman will stay with you if you are going to prison for more than say 6 months or a year. They'll probably divorce you. The marriage will be over. Obviously, from the status angle, also your status as someone in prison or who's gone to prison is going to descend big time. And women, of course, always prefer to be with guys that they deem of higher status. Social status is definitely not something assigned to a guy who's been to prison or who is in prison often. Now, yes, there are a class of women who really get off on the fact of a guy having been in prison or who are in prison. There's very well-known cases of guys that get written up by hundreds or even thousands of women on a year-by-year basis. These are guys that are like in the mass murder category, and these guys get hit up by a lot of women and girls also. There is an audience that likes these type of guys, but for guys who've been to prison or jail and then who leave, many of these guys, when they get out, of course, if they were married, their wife's not there, their girlfriend's not there, whoever, their partner isn't there. If they were gay, there's any number of situations that occur when a guy goes to prison, and often life looks quite different when they get out. And it's very unfortunate, but it's just the reality. I think MGTOW, though, is often the preferred philosophy for guys who've been to prison. I actually knew a guy when I was living in Minnesota. He was a friend of mine, and from how he spoke and how he lived his life, to me, it very much reminded me of MGTOW philosophy. Now, I don't know if he was MGTOW, but it really reminded me of this. I was in my late teens at the time, and many of these guys can have a lot of emotional and psychological problems. Many of them want to find like a new woman or try to rehook up with their wife or ex-wife. Some may have kids that they're responsible for, and they want to grow the relationship with their children. But unfortunately, all of these things are very challenging because it's compounded by the fact that getting a job is very difficult with a prison record, and even the most basic jobs are very difficult to get. Now imagine with the times we're experiencing right now, with how high unemployment is and underemployment. And those guys now have to compete with a lot of people who haven't been in prison or jail. And you can see how hard it is. If you have like a felony on your record, very difficult to get a job once they run a background check, especially if it's within a certain class of crime. It's going to be probably no-go. And often what a lot of guys do, the successful guys have to start their own businesses or companies and just grind out and try to make something on their own, because that's the only way they can build a decent amount of status after they've been in this position. When you think about it though, a lot of the guys in prison have problems that MGTOW of course can solve, or who are in prison. And we could take a case like Watts, this famous guy who lost his whole family back a few years ago, and he obviously he had a lot of problems. He obviously had a side chick, and then he himself was had his wife. He had 2 kids, was about to have a 3rd one, and I think the MGTOW philosophy would have pretty much saved this guy. I mean, he was in such a bad state of mind. He was surrounding himself with more women for whatever reason, I don't know. The side chick that he had, this gal was certainly not a good addition to his life. He should have found some guy mentors who could have helped guided him and kind of gotten him back in the right state of mind. But this kind of story is very similar for many other guys who are about to go to prison or who end up committing a crime or who get out of prison. This situation is quite common. And these guys, so in his case, he obviously was in a marriage and stuff, so MGTOW wouldn't really totally correlate with his life, but I think some of the concepts of MGTOW would have saved him. I also believe that if he didn't break the marriage with his wife, she would have divorced him within the next 2 years after that whole situation occurred. I think she would have gotten divorced with him anyhow, and he would have been single once again. So many of these guys, especially guys who go to prison, I believe it's something like 80% of guys in U.S. prisons grew up in single mother households. It's very high. And when you look at a lot of the crime rate, there's a very, very strong correlation with men growing up in single parent households raised by mothers in crime. They go often hand in hand. Yes, it's not always the case, but this is often the correlation. Many of these guys obviously lack a real father figure. They don't have any real patriarchal guidance in their life, and they do stupid stuff. Sometimes not realizing just how stupid it is and how much of their life they can lose by doing something and then going to prison or jail. That's why these guys obviously, they need MGTOW philosophy to change themselves, to adjust. And perhaps maybe it's better designed for guys before ending up in prison, or at least during their time in prison. It could save them. But so when many guys, when they get out of prison, they're often without job, they don't have money or very little money. A few exception cases, there's guys like Michael Francisi. I mean, he probably had hundreds of millions in his bank accounts when he got out, stashed away, but those are not common situations. Most guys, they get out, they don't have money, they're without job. If they had a partner or spouse, they're probably not in the picture anymore. What these guys need to realize though is that a lot of their own problems are within. Only they can really fix themselves and fix their life. I think some of these guys, when they get out, are seeking a woman so rapidly, so quickly, is because they see that as making their identity more complete, because they kind of lack some identity, especially after being in prison. They feel need of something or need of someone, and they latch on to whatever woman gives them a chance, not realizing that this can actually be it can actually have the opposite effect of what they think. Now, if you also think about how prison works, how jails work, it's very much kind of a dependency mindset. It very much runs against like a MGTOW philosophy. It's very much, of course, built on a system of having all these like people in authority positions above, having to follow all these rules, all these standards, all these, it's just rule after rule. It's very institutional, of course. Obviously, this is completely the opposite of like MGTOW philosophy, which of course emphasizes men going their own way, living out their lives as they see fit, and not clinging on to anyone or anything for life to find fulfillment in life. Whereas if you look at like prison and jail, it's often not like that. And I think also in places like the US, why do so many guys partner up with other guys? They start batting for the other team. Now, I understand there's of course gay people in everywhere. It's just how life is. All countries there's gay people, but some of these guys, I think, start batting for the other team because they have such a strong dependency mindset, and it replaces the not having a woman there, so they find another guy, especially guys who are serving like life sentences. It's very high, the number of guys that will end up batting for the other team. I remember watching a video with Lawson. Larry Lawson, I believe his name is. He has one of these prison shows, or it might be Lawson. But this guy was talking about like in the one of the prisons he was at, and other guys who were like life sentences. It was very high, the percentage of those guys that had other men as partners. I believe he said it was something like 400 of them had like guy partners. It was insane. And these guys, I think they find dependency in that other man, and they see it as kind of like their wife, as their spouse. And this is a prime example, though, that these guys, they obviously often grow up in single mother households. They often have their first girlfriends when they're very young, and often maintain some kind of relationship with a woman up until they get incarcerated. And then when they have to be independent, it's very difficult. And unfortunately, some of them ended up in prison probably partially due to that woman in the first place that they were with. They maybe did something to make quick money, or they didn't have good guidance. And the woman they were with probably wasn't telling them, don't do this, don't do this. And see, it's very different also. When a woman says don't do something and then they continue to sleep with the guy, actions speak louder than words. Often, though, the woman doesn't say, nope, I'm leaving, I'm done, I'm not in this relationship. Often, though that does not happen, the woman rewards the bad boy, carries out like some criminal act, and they continue sleeping with them and maintaining relationship. Of course, I mean, some women really get off on the fact that they're like sleeping with the bad boy. It isn't something they're going to leave. It's entertaining for them because the lives of females is often very boring. They often find much of their entertainment and their sense of identity in men. That's how females think. They will claim they don't think this way, but it's actually how they think. They're often actually always looking to men for their sense of entertainment and fulfillment and joy. It's the same situation. And so these bad boys can be very entertaining and very fun, very amusing, even if the guy's doing bad stuff. You see all these bank robbers, and you saw like Bonnie and Clyde, these kind of films where the woman was more than happy to stay with the guy even when they were doing the criminal acts, and some even participated with them in the situation. And also note, along with guys that have been to war, it's often very high, the number of guys who off themselves, like we saw with Epstein, the guys that, whether they do it to themselves when they're in prison or they get out. We saw this in the movie Shawshank Redemption when the guy took his own life. I mean, this is very common for guys who've been in prison and the guys who serve very long sentences when they get out, because it's often a mindset of what can I do when I get out. There's so much of my life I've been institutionalized. I haven't been in normal environments, where people handle their affairs in a more cordial manner when there's problems. Often in prison, it's handled with a state of intimidation, fear, violence. Often they don't handle affairs in prison in a way that is congruent with civilian life. And that's the irony when they say how they're trying to rehabilitate prisoners. Are they really rehabilitating them? I don't think so. I think they're just institutionalizing them more. And I look at the system's not perfect like in Scandinavia, but I would say in Scandinavia and Germany, they certainly do at least have a system of rehabilitation for guys who go to prison, are incarcerated. I don't really see that in the US. In Canada, it's actually the complete opposite. I think they take guys who don't deserve to be in prison, and guys that are not criminals, and they put them with legit criminals, and those guys end up getting more screwed up in prison, and maybe they go out and do more criminal acts, not knowing anything else, and getting bad ideals in their head. But all of these guys in prison, they would benefit so much from MGTOW philosophy. And I sincerely hope, if it's not there already, that in prisons they maybe have advertisements, pamphlets. Guys can get like books about MGTOW philosophy, and I think it would do incredible things for the guys in the prison system. There's certainly a lot of religion that's emphasized, it seems like, in prison systems, but I also believe that like MGTOW philosophy would be a huge benefit for guys that are in who have long or short sentences, and then when they get out, they understand, okay, I need to approach life in this way. Not to depend on anyone or anything. Obviously, there's a high level of mutual respect within MGTOW philosophy, and guys are really just taught to go their own way and not to fall in the trap that you need someone, that you need a woman or relationship to get by when you don't need it. Obviously, guys, they don't need that for their sense of identity. They just feel more positive and more at ease with life. So give me your feedback on this video, and thank you.